Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Carol Cohn. I'm the director of the Consortium on Gender Security and Human Rights here at UMass Boston. And it is my pleasure to welcome those of you in the room, as well as the many people joining us on Zoom. For those of you on Zoom, the chat is now on. Please feel free to introduce yourselves, and we'll turn it on again at the end. And during the talk, please submit your questions through the question and answer. And we would be grateful if you fill out the little survey that will pop up at the end. For those of you in the room, you have been handed a survey. We would be equally appreciative if you could give us feedback. Before introducing today's speaker, I want to open by situating us in this place, UMass Boston, which was built on the unceded homelands of the indigenous Massachusetts people, and by honoring the diverse indigenous peoples' enduring relationships with their traditional territories, and by foregrounding that the way that land has passed from indigenous to non-indigenous control is through a violent history of genocide and forced removal, and the death, dispossession, and displacement of countless communities and families, all processes which remain ongoing today around the world. I'd also like to emphasize that land acknowledgements by themselves are just a small start, a small step in addressing the history and present so riddled with injustice. They need to be followed up by other forms of action and solidarity. Our event today is the fifth talk in a 2-semester-long series on climate breakdown and the war system that the Consortium on Gender Security and Human Rights has organized in collaboration with the Department of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, with support from a grant from an Affirming Multivocal Humanities grant from the Mellon Foundation. So I'd first like to thank the department and Dr. Amani El-Jack for this continuing collaboration. We also are grateful for the gratifyingly large other numbers of departments, programs, centers, and offices here at UMass who are co-sponsoring this series. You can see them all on screen. Their support is absolutely essential for us in enabling us to bring you these speakers. My thanks also go to the many wonderful consortium interns, UMass Boston students and staff, and the consortium program associate Claire Kendrick, who've played key roles in preparing for and running these events. And finally, I want to express my profound appreciation to consortium intern Alinka Drondo, who's back here, who has been my partner in conceptualizing and organizing this series from the very start. Now, I was going to, because this is a series on climate breakdown and the war system, focusing this semester on militaries, policing, AI, and struggles for justice, I was going to spend a little bit of time talking about the current war in Iran. However, I'm not going to for two reasons. One of them is to leave enough time to have lots of questions and answers for Xander when he gives his talk. And the other is because I just want to mention that this war is one of, depending on how you count, between 50 and 100 other armed conflicts going on in the world right now, and we need to not lose sight of that. So let me go ahead and introduce to you Dr. Alexander Dunlap. We're very excited to have him with us today to shed light on the enormous amounts of energy, materials, and infrastructure that policing and militarization rely on, and to bring these costs into conversations about climate breakdown. Dr. Dunlap will trace how the everyday work of social control and policing drives extraction and environmental harm, and will help us understand why struggles for prison and police abolition are deeply connected to land defense and environmental justice. Dr. Dunlap is a research scientist at the Boston University Institute for Global Sustainability and a visiting research fellow in global development studies at the University of Helsinki. He was trained as a social anthropologist, and his work sits at the intersection of political ecology, development, and the study of policing and militarism. Across research in Mexico, Germany, Peru, France, Spain, and Portugal, Dr. Dunlap has examined how low-carbon transitions are built through extractive development and police-military transformations. He's currently a co-editor at the journal Human Geography, and his ongoing research follows the cycle of solar development from mining raw material inputs and manufacturing components to project operations and eventually decommissioning. He is the author and co-author of several books, and actually, I brought the newest one with me to show you. Sorry about that. So the books include Enforcing Ecocide, Power, Policing and Planetary Militarization, The Violent Technologies of Extraction, Political Ecology, Critical Agrarian Studies, and the Capitalist World Eater, Renewing Destruction, Wind Energy Development, Conflict Resistance in a Latin American Context, and brand new, This System is Killing Us, Land Grabbing, the Green Economy, and Ecological Conflict. So we are really excited to have him here with us. Please help me in welcoming him now.
Oh, good morning. Class time. Are you excited? Thank you. Carol, Claire, everyone, the Consortium on Gender, Security, and Human Rights, thanks so much for having me here, and also thanks to the land acknowledgement and acknowledging the endless wars that our governments are pulling us into. And while there's a lot to talk about geopolitically, which I hope everyone is, and looking at and considering about what's going on across the ponds and the waters and the oceans and the seas, I'm going to bring us home a little bit. I'm going to bring us to really look at the things that are kind of right here and with us. So I'm going to try to go through this as fast as I can because there's a lot of technical things and it could be a lot more technical even. But let's get through this. And of course it doesn't click when it's supposed to. There we go. So, general outline, I'm going to talk about being against climate change, the approach and theory with these things, the hypothesis argument of that I'm presenting here, categorizing ecocide, really questioning what is green. Here, let's get this out of here. And the police, and we're going to have a little conclusion, reflect on some things. And I just hope this is going to be kind of fun and interesting, and we're going to get into something a little more practical that actually affects us every day, even if we don't really realize it does. So a lot of what I'll be talking about today comes from the Enforcing Ecocide book. It's specifically the chapter, The Self-Reinforcing Cycle of Ecological Degradation and Repression, Revealing the Ecological Costs of Policing and Militarization. So in general, we talk about climate change, but why not talk about the military and police and the environmental impacts they create? What is the relationship between climate change or socio-ecological catastrophe and institutions of security and political violence? Do we think about this? We hear a lot about climate change, but do we talk about actually the ecological impacts of the police and the military? What exactly is the relationship between habitat or so-called natural resource extraction and militarization? It's getting a little redundant here, but you see the point. And do we need military police change to prevent climate change? So this is kind of where we're going with this, but let's keep moving. So against climate change, this sounds weird. It's actually a bit of a double pun, but the problem, the more we know, the more it continues. Have you noticed that the more we talk about climate change, the more we have more information and metrics, despite a lot of the positions of the US government and what they're really forcing through right now, the worse it gets. This is a dilemma that we should really consider and go into. But one thing I want to stress, and maybe a reason to be against climate change, not only for it happening, but also as a framework, is that climate change creates a distancing effect. You know, it has this, instead of being in the local, what's around us, where we can maybe have the most influence, it's actually pressing us to think about the planetary, Earth, and really focusing on the big. And this big, I would say, hides and deflects a lot of the local ecological degradation. And really, we have to remember that climate change really is just a series of hundreds, thousands, if not millions of local impacts that then accumulate to this larger framework. And I think this is this distancing effect that has us forget this, maybe has a little sleight of hand going on. It has a bit of a power relation we need to really, really unpack. And so the idea is that big problems, we're shown with this distancing effect shows us that big problems needs big actors, that it's only states, corporations, international climate consortiums, and NGOs are the ones that can actually be the ones that make change. And that really, Your job is to just sit back, relax, go to school, go to work, be a good consumer, buy the right products, and, the big guys will take care of it. Big guys and big women, in terms of these normative standards. This is compounded by this idea of not only do we need big actors, but we need big science. You can see this model right here of, there's Earth system science, we need to model and control the world. And so there's this certain kind of epistemology and this method of knowledge that's being advanced to actually how you can kind of look at and control the Earth and how you can measure it. And you can more or less try to treat the Earth like a household in terms of measuring ins and outs and exerting control over the household. And yes, this is a reference to kind of to patriarchy. Another big thing is carbon emissions. And so there's this idea of climate reductions. And I think Peter Gilliland is great at really stressing this point, that all issues are reduced to climate and or carbon accounting, making other ecological and most importantly, social issues subordinate or less important. So here's an excellent little graph that was made, or a graphic, that really we've tried to collapse all the complications of society. Crazy. We've tried to collapse all the complications of society into carbon emissions, to just really make this really easy framework for governance, to advance certain sciences, to advance a certain type of control. And that's why I'd say that this perspective suffers from climate masculinities. And this, thinking of it, this is really, the feminist critique of science is really what's being advanced here. And so thinking of Kara Daggett, Elizabeth Bell, and other colleagues, we may call this an expression of climate masculinities, emphasizing grand scales, reductionary data, rooted in approaches of scientific domination of the planet, which marginalize or ignore other scientific approaches. So if we want to do annoying big words, ontologies and epistemologies. So other ways of knowing, other ways of being, other ways of actually living, also developing, creating, and inhabiting. So this is to say that climate change has a lot of issues. Not only is it happening, and it's something that is a big concern, but this framework is actually, I would argue, perpetuating these dynamics, and that really we have to look into the areas where we are and to intervene in those places and obviously move out from that if it's an issue that you really think is serious and you want to stop it. So yeah, here's some fun graphs. I use these in a lot of presentations. So I have a really hard time with carbon as the only metric of understanding ecological crisis and climate change, but even by these own standards, and this is a great graphic made by climate justice activists in Germany, that you can just see that despite all the negotiations and international conversations about this, we're running out of colors in terms of to demonstrate how bad it is. And on the other side, in terms of different material extraction, at this point, there's no such thing as energy transition. There's only energy addition and more consumption and more extraction. And this is concerning. But, and we're going to talk about some of this extraction today, and really what is something we don't talk enough about, and what I'm really saying to you today is going to be highlighting areas of more research and more interest that need to be taken seriously. But before that, let's look at the theory and the approach here. What's kind of guiding this research in this chapter, I would say is ecological anarchist theory, which we could also call the golden rule theory. And what's important about the quote I'm about to show you is that this is actually work and ideas from Massachusetts and Vermont that was developed. And so specifically the works of Murray Bookchin and Kirkpatrick Sale. And Kirkpatrick Sale lived in Massachusetts. And Kirkpatrick Sale, summarizing the work of Murray Bookchin, I think says this very well. And this is really what's behind and what has motivated a lot of this research. And he says, societies that dominate nature also dominate people. Where there is the idea that a massive dam should be built to control the river's flow, there's the idea that people should be enslaved to build it. Where there is the belief that a giant metropole may serve itself by despoiling the surrounding countryside and devouring its raw materials, there are castes and hierarchies to ensure that this is accomplished. It's simple. You do unto others, and it's going to happen. If you start domesticating and abusing the land, you're going to start doing it to people, so on and so forth. And so what's important, and I think with anarchist approaches in general, typically, is they seek to prevent the possibilities, means or ability to create these situations through social norms, organizational layouts, moral and spiritual relations. So, I mean, Pierre Clastres looking at indigenous people, David Graeber, they've actually really operated in this tradition of actually how to organize societies to prevent, absolute power to create absolute corruption? How do you prevent an organized life to not allow certain relationships to take place? So how do you do this before they happen? But this is the kind of approach and idea that's actually behind this chapter and a lot of this work that I wanted to be more explicit about and share with you today. So the hypothesis and argument that we're going to be going through is, one, police military vehicle, equipment, and weapons of repressive forces could not exist without the destruction and sacrifice of ecologies. Pretty simple, but I don't think we think enough about this. Two, the common issue associated with the police, such as racial discrimination, enforcing class structures, white supremacy, and police brutality, are in reality inherently ecological and extractive issues. So we might be addressing a social issue when we're being beaten, ticketed, attacked, and witness injustice, and I mean, not to mention prisons. But at the same time, those things couldn't exist without devastating environments to create those things. Three, anti-war and anti-police outrage and rioting then can and should be read as an outrage and even an ecological riots against the extractivism and ecological destruction that supports police power and makes police brutality possible in the first place. So the latter perspective establishes an ever-present and largely unrealized connectivity and common solidarity between political and ecological concerns as one. So this is, I guess I'm very cliche political ecology here and just stressing that we can't separate these differences despite living in societies that constantly do this. The way we think, the way we move, the way things are produced are constantly trying to tear the political and social, cultural away, and also scientific away from the material realities. And this has a lot to do with the science and ontology by which we relate and approach the world. And we can hopefully talk about that later if I get through this fast enough. But this is to say, defending habitats confronts and implicitly defends against police violence. Think about that. The more you actually defend rivers, trees, minerals, mountains, you name it, you're actually could be preventing more war and police violence in some way. But this is this is a bit questionable, but you see the lines I'm trying to draw. So, moving on, being a bit academic, let's categorizing ecocide. I just like us to think about the impacts of war and these things in three ways. One, the material requirements, whether it's for tanks, aircrafts, or for police vehicles or SWAT teams, there's the material requirements, which requires mining, raw material processing, smelting, mineral markets, and online trading of minerals, manufacturing, and so on. So there's an entire apparatus of mining, chemical production, and an insane amount of poisons and destruction that goes in just even procuring the material, let alone perfecting it, refining it, and manufacturing it. And this is something that this presentation is going to focus on a little bit, but there's so much more work that can be done on this, and it's very challenging for reasons I'll be talking about. Second, operations. Then there's the fuel, repair, coolants, grease, and transportation of different materials. Again, whether this is the police trucks, vans, or these are tanks and aircraft carriers, there's an insane amount of materials and energy, not only gasoline, fuels, and all these things, but also people that are required to power these things and make them work. Oh, these kitty cats, you're going to learn by the end of this presentation, I'm a big fan of cats. But impacts, killing people, animals, trees, poisoning water, spreading chemicals, toxin, radioactivity. There's an insane amount of ecological destruction that goes into war making itself, which we're seeing in Iran and pretty much all the Middle Eastern states right now. And I just want to stress that we don't think about the animals and the rivers enough, and also the plants, especially when we see glyphosate being spread across southern Lebanon, and really these real profoundly ecocidal actions taking place in this moment. So yeah, raw materials require coercion and security. To even have these things, you need war, and you have war making. And so we're ultimately witnessing a self-fulfilling system of extraction, violence, toxification, and death. And I have a cute little graphic I made that you'll see later on about this. Oh, here it is. I thought it was coming later. So yeah, it's this horribly self-fulfilling cycle that, as simple as it is, and as complicated as the supply chains are, it's just reinforcing itself. The whole thing's designed as a war machine to continue to extract and to produce this process. And the more you extract to make more weapons and tanks and can indoctrinate people to fight for these things, the more they can go protect mine, before they can go clear areas to create mines, cut forests, and protect them from people trying to defend and reclaim their lands. So this is actually to kind of come up and to kind of set a foundation. And I'm not going to read you a lot of this because we got a lot of places to go. But about 2 weeks ago, my beloved colleague, Nico Edwards, she talked about how the military is greening itself. One of the things I want to impart on you is actually how much energy and materials goes into so-called greening. And let's be clear, I'm the type that lives off grid with solar panels, and I believe in low carbon infrastructures. I believe that wind turbines, solar panels, micro hydro, I believe these can be used responsibly. I even think large scale community and microgrid, community energy, utility community energy systems, and energy cooperatives and different urban grids can be used in great and amazing ways. However, they're not. And this is the conversation behind a lot of other presentations and books and works that I've done. But this graph to stress you, and there's 8 different types of wind turbines. So they're all gonna have slightly different material requirements. But the point of this graph is to show you the insane amount of concrete, the insane amount of steel, carbon composites for the blades, which are very difficult to recycle, copper, the rare earth elements, dysprosium, cast iron, neodymium, balsa wood. The Ecuadorian Amazon is being cut down specifically for balsa wood to go around carbon composites for wind turbine blades. And again, please look at the work of Larry Lohman about some of this and others. So this is to say that there are insane material costs, and that these wind turbines that are green, they don't come from nowhere, which is what I feel like people have been pretending for the last 20 or 30 years or since the 1970s. Same goes for solar. I just came off of a very large project looking in the United States that the whole life cycle of solar panels, from mining, manufacturing, operation, and disposal. I have a lot of work published on this that finally just came out, all the disposal stuff, and it is all profoundly concerning in terms of material and energy. And this is not to say to sell, I am not an advocate of nuclear. I think this is an even more frightening disaster, especially in terms of its production, maintaining the facilities, producing uranium ore, and also, of course, what do you do with nuclear waste, which is something that haunts the United States and the world to this day in a very serious way, and especially on indigenous territories. But yeah, with solar panels, another complications, a lot of chemicals, a lot of intense processing facilities. And it's not to say don't use these, it's that these have to be used responsibly, they have to be manufactured responsibly, and most importantly, need to be disposed of responsibly, which I know First Solar is trying to do and take responsibility for with their cadmium telluride panels. But there's more that can be done on this, and we can talk about this, but this is just to say that the things that are green are a serious issue. And then it becomes, thinking of Nico Edwards' presentation, an even crazier issue when you see the military trying to green itself. So really stressing this, and this report by the London Mining Network is amazing, called Marshall Mining. For one ton of aluminum, you need 4 tons of bauxite ore. So you need 4 tons of mining to get approximately 1 ton of ore. Copper, you need for 1 ton of copper, 110 tons of waste ore are produced. For rare earth elements, you have 1 ton for 1.4 tons of radioactive waste, 60 million liters of waste gas with hydrochloric acid, and 200,000 liters of acid-containing sewage. For iron ore, you have 1 ton for 3 tons of waste, magnesite. You have 1 ton for up to 2.5 tons. Zinc, nickel, again, we have some other things to get into, but this is just to stress the amount of material and energy that goes into this, which I feel this presentation or reading these numbers to you does not do it justice because of how severe these infrastructures that are made that do this, and the work that is done and what happens to the environment to make them. And again, this is from our friends at the International Energy Agency, and what isn't here, we have to stress, is the amount of coal that's mined. Yeah, so we're not looking at that. That's a huge issue. But if we are looking at the material that goes into some of these facilities, it's shocking the amount of materials, as you can see with this nice color code, that go into offshore wind turbines, which also need more rare earth elements because they're more durable in those types of conditions out at sea. Onshore, solar PV, nuclear, coal, natural gas, these are entirely material intensive. But here's even what's most concerning, is that in the note for this graph, let me read to you, steel and aluminum, not included. The value of offshore wind and onshore wind are based on the direct drive permanent magnet synchronous generator system, including array cables and the doubly fed injection generator system, respectively. The values for coal and natural gas are based on an ultra supercritical plants combined cycle gas turbines. But the point is there's a lot, it's very hard to even measure these things based on what technology they are, and they're often excluding a lot of the different materials that are in them. And that's what's really concerning with what the media is doing. Sometimes the researchers, even when they're doing life cycle assessments or doing these different assessments, they'll have method sections that are telling you all the assumptions they're making, a lot of the data that's missing, and it's based on these things that they would say, oh, this could maybe be sustainable or environmentally friendly. But then their departments, blogs, or the media will take these things out there and start saying how these are renewable and this works like this. And this is a really big kind of political and social problem that is ignored. But I'm not here to berate green technologies because that's what I normally do. But what does this mean when we talk about war making? Look, I mean, it's for whatever you just saw in the graphs about wind turbines and solar panels, the amount of materials that go into the different missiles, the tanks, and the aircraft is insane. And that's the point of this. You can at least see some nice pictures that are stressing all the different specialty metals that need all sorts of different types of mining, different chemicals to do the mining and to pull. I mean, I'm not sure how y'all know, but when you go and take a piece of ore out of the ground, you're going to have a series of different metals and often trace amounts, or you'll have certain veins. So there's going to be different levels of quantity for the ore. But then at what point, how do you get those ores? How do you separate those special metals out of the ores? And it requires insane amount of chemicals, also based on hydrocarbons. There's going to be different chemical leaching processes, and it's all very complicated and all based on these specific metals or the type of deposit they're in. But the point of all this is there's an insane amount of energy, material, and people and processes and infrastructures created to even have these mines, then to even break them down and to try to refine them and smelt them and then turn them into something so they can even begin being cut down and manufactured to produce weapons in this case, or tanks or missiles. So I'm sad that this research isn't actually made more public, and part of this is just because people are very busy and they have a lot of things to do. But this is from Julia Klinger's group, and this is the Joint Direct Attack Munition. So they're more or less smart Mk-84 bombs. In September 2024, over 500,000 JDM kits have been produced. Ooh, we've got a long way to go, but we're going to do this. You have 500,000 bombs produced, and of that, 19,000 sold to the IDF in Israel. So with that, for aluminum, the equivalent of the amount of aluminum used in these bombs could power the same amount of 8,127 4.2 megawatt wind turbines and energy. Lithium, the guidance section of a lot of the missiles, you could power the amount of lithium you use for certain batteries. That would go to 70,000 batteries for electric vehicle chargers. Same for neodymium, iron boron, which is a type of rare earth element magnets. For the JDM contains an estimated 0.34 kegs of this particular type of magnet, and that could actually go to produce 360 4.2 megawatt wind turbines. So when we're making war, despite whatever criticality or ways that we need to be more responsible with wind turbines and solar panels, every time a bomb is dropped, every time a bomb is produced, this is material competition with solar panels and with wind turbines. And that means there's going to be more mining. Every time there's more war, there's more mining, there's more ecological destruction. And we go back to my little recycling label of this more or less down spiral of militarization, policing, and extractivism that is only going to worsen conditions, quality of life, and food, if not directly kill you with a bomb going on your head, which is something we don't want. And yeah, sorry, I should have done this earlier in case the fact is, this is just to show you that this group has done a lot of work to produce infographics to show this, and it's more or less impossible to look at it in this space right here. So, what about the police? Wow. There's 22.7 million firearms used by the police forces, excluding many agencies. High-powered equipment, assault rifles, submachine guns. handcuffs, nightsticks, tasers, pepper spray, handguns, computers, radios, bulletproof vests, body cameras, drones, databases, and so much more. SUVs, cars, armored vehicles, helicopters, drones, ICE, high-tech weaponry, specialty bullets. You know, this is just to say the amount of materials that are being carried around by the police are intense, and we don't talk about that. And if we keep going here, to even produce a gun, you need nickel, chromium, tungsten, non-metallic elements like plastic, also moly, sulfur, and silicon. So where do these things come from? How are they produced? Even more so for the metal molding and processing, the amount of heat requirements for different metal blends. So each gun has very detailed and specific blends. And you're gonna, I mean, they're noted for 1060, 4140, 5150, so on and so forth. But there's a high level of specialty smelting and blending to have these minerals and metals that we don't talk about. To be policed, to be beat up, and to have tickets is a serious ecological issue. And then let's not forget tear gas. Here we go. You know, besides a lot of these things being banned, and I mean, please look at my friend Anna's book about it's called Tear Gas with Verso. It gives you the history of tear gas, but it comes from, you know, shooting at people in Paris and in the trenches of World War I. It's banned. They're chemical weapons, but they're used everywhere and have serious health impacts that people don't talk about and are largely ignored, so they can implement cloud control. But guess what? Of course, there's a huge material requirement to be poisoned and beat by tear gas. Same for tasers. We have a way to go. I'm going to have to go through this quickly. And it just keeps going. Yeah. So, equipment statistics. Yeah. This is just between 2006 and 2016. There's a lot of things missing. I'm sure it's even more now. This isn't accounting for what's going on with ICE right now and all the different kind of specialty weapons and high-equipped things they have and the way that the Trump administration has rolled this out. But at least for this time, just to conceptualize the serious issues and look at the money next to it, because we're going to talk about this in the end, is that between 2006 and 2016, there was 7,091 trucks. There was 625 mine-resistant vehicles. There was 471 helicopters, 56 planes, 329 armored trucks and cars, 83,122 M16, M14 rifles at different lengths, 8,198 pistols, 1,385 Riot 12-gauge shotguns. I got it. 18,299 night vision sight sniper scopes, binoculars, goggles, infrared image magnifiers. Again, the amount of specialty minerals to make the magic of night vision goggles and scopes is something we need to think about. 118 infrared articulated panoramic laser telescopes, 866 mine detecting sets, marking kits and probes, 57 grenade launchers, police with great grenade launchers, great. 5,638 bayonets, 856 mine resistance ambush protected MRAB vehicles. Wow. Do we talk about how these are produced, where they're produced, how much, and the energy and material going into this? In the conversation about climate change, socio-ecological catastrophe, or so-called energy transition, are we talking about these minerals? Are we talking about these minerals, but are we talking about these materials that are being used for policing? And this raises the question, why do we need policing? Why do we need prisons? Where does this come from? And how do you actually address these issues? Are these issues to have an insane amount of weapons and high-grade weapons to hold things in place? Maybe there's some deeper issues that are well established that aren't being addressed. But again, we can talk about this. And vehicles. Here's some nice graphs about actually the amount of energy being used to produce a lot of the vehicles, which I'm not going to dwell on because I have 10 minutes. And here we go. I'm gonna hit you again with these numbers. And it's a very simple point. It's a lot, and we're not talking about it. Between 2014 and 2019, there's 208,461 police cars, SUVs, and prisoner transport trucks from Ford Motor Company. And there's other companies that are used, so there's even more than this. Does not include pickup trucks, motorcycles, and other models. Police car adaptation plants, dismantling and structural reinforcement. So even when they produce them, the police cars go to another plant where they're taken apart, where they have new wheel welds, which might shock absorbers, high performance discs, engine modification, so on. So there's a whole nother layer of material requirement and reinforcement that is also not accounted for. Ford Interceptors in 2011 used 16 miles per gallon in cities, and in 2018, 70 miles per gallon, and consumes 1,176 gallons or 4,451 liters fuel per year. I assure you this is a very conservative statistic, but if you're concerned about hydrocarbon and fossil fuel use, and now with the oil prices going up pretty crazy, this is only costing more money and things. Decarbonizing the police. This is a real thing. Again, this is related to other lectures really going on electric mobility and critical raw material mining that I do. But yeah, now they're trying to make hybrid cars and they're trying to green themselves. They put solar panels on the top of police stations and prisons, and there's a whole regime like this. And they also use prisoners, which is a paper that I came out with. They use prisoners to decommission electronic waste, which is something very concerning. The MRAP vehicles have an average of 3 miles per gallon, armored trucks 5 miles per gallon. Military vehicles such as MRAP vehicles are exempt from diesel engine emission. Consider engine wear, and this is to say all these have wears and leaks. I mean, many of you might have cars, you know that these things are constantly leaking and there's problems with them. Oh yeah, 2021 hybrid Interceptors, 833 gallons a year. This is, here we go. So we got some big conclusion. We got some things we're gonna go through. Luckily I have some time here. One of the things I haven't said yet is that none of this is me and this chapter trying to look and think about all the different things that we don't think about. There is not proper measurement and accountability to actually look at the material requirements that are going on in these things. This is an enormous research gap, and it's a challenging one because a lot of this data is not made available. There's a lot of people, there's been big efforts the last couple of years. I mean, for more time, more has been dedicated to the military, and there's been a lot of efforts to really look at the carbon emissions of the military, and there's been great work done on that by a colleague, Benjamin Nymark and Patrick Bigger, among others, that I highly recommend, and it's cited in that chapter. But we're not talking about the police, and we're not talking about where these things come from. And so really what I want to stress here in this conclusion is that the material requirements for the military and police is extensive and an existential issue largely ignored by public policy. We're not talking about it. I'm here to raise this issue to say that there's scientific issues with this in terms of accounting, but there's also public policy and social issues in terms of how this isn't being talked about. Critical scrutiny and data collation is lacking, which I just said, but there's so much more research that can be done on this. It's daunting, and that's a more detailed and nerdier conversation about the gaps. And I want to imagine that there's a lot of things I'm missing, and there's got to be some. Like climate change, security and geopolitical competition is a localized issue that produces lethal planetary impacts. So just the same way I was critiquing climate change for not actually looking at the things that are happening locally, the same happens to police and military and war logistic operations. There's so much more that can be done to actually address these impacts here, to actually try to make more socially and ecologically sustainable societies and move more towards a circular economy, which I don't see much effort towards. Enforcing class, racial, and non-gender hierarchies is ecologically damaging. So when we look at the purpose of the police and also military, which is just operating on a geopolitical level, to enforce class, gender, and racial hierarchies is ecologically damaging. Racial discrimination is an ecological issue as much as it's also a social issue. They're combined. So there should be less divisions in different social movements, places, and also research in terms of looking at these things. Discriminatory practices is an ecological problem and its need for security, police, and military operations. Again, stressing this point, political, social, and ecological cannot be separated, whether within movement or policy. Police violence is ecological violence. And that's, I mean, we didn't even talk about, I mean, one of the things I talked about in that chapter is when people are trying to have accountability for police, and there are protests, and the police come and they're just ripping apart water bottles and dumping water into the street so people can't have water to drink to protest them. There's so many angles and ways this is a serious ecological issue. Capitalist modernity produces lethal subjectivities and habitation patterns that demand immediate challenge and transformation. Break the cycle of violence, extraction, militarization, and then, which leads to more extraction. This cycle of violence has to be broken. Domestic international security industries are literally and figuratively invested in perpetuating inequality, trauma, poverty, low and high intensity warfare. So this is a point I want to sit with. You saw all the money that goes into this. For a very long time now, we'll just be generous and say 30 or 40 years, there are ways to create healthy relationships with the land, with each other, with habitation patterns and building. And there are ways to enforce and create insecurity, crime, poverty, and violence. There's very clear ways to address these things. There's no shortage of scientists and solutions to actually address these issues. However, if you have an industry that's designed and necessitates, especially if you, there's laws enforcing shareholder value. Your company, whether arms or not, or weapons, needs to be producing more profit than the annual accounting period before. There's a structural enforcement and investment towards poverty, insecurity, inequality, maladaptation of society to make sure that there are more weapons, there are more police vehicles, there are more cycles perpetuating this. Same goes for warfare. There are some people benefiting greatly right now from not only domestic turmoil, trauma, and inequality, and the violence that comes from the high levels of disrespect that come with living in a control or police society, but the same goes with warfare. Every missile shot is a lot of money for someone. Every bullet shot is a lot of money for someone. And that means there are serious powers invested in maintaining inequality, discrimination, and these patterns. And this is something that I think is a very serious, not only public policy, but public health issue that has needed to be addressed and still needs to be addressed. And you all are the young folk that are coming into this that I hope will continue to take this up and to try to do better, because the adults have failed to this point, or have not failed, but could do better if we're going to be diplomatic. Yeah, so this is kind of sad. I'm just pointing out a reality we already know. We sit in this, we live in this. There's also very beautiful things. There's great kitty cats, and despite it being freezing out, there's sun, there's beautiful trees. There's a lot of things we can love and cherish in our day. But we also know that things can be a little better, or maybe a lot better. And what I advocate is that, of course, degrowth and post-growth approaches are necessary as a start. The US has been particularly resistant towards this, but every country to a degree, but particularly the US has been very resistant to really talking about questioning constant extractivism, breaking this cycle, questioning what economic growth means, not reconceptualizing growth to actually be based on our emotional, spiritual, or health growth, or our happiness. There's the happiness index, but there's a lot of ways we can reconceptualize growth and regrow different things that are really important. But there really needs to be degrowth and post-growth as public policy to really figure out how to make things a little better, how to destroy the environment less, and how to make sure that people are happy and that the water, the soil, the air are getting cleaner, and that there's less stress and trauma in general. But in addition to pushing these public policy approaches, there is the need for collective struggle to demilitarize communities, reuse, reduce, and recycle as a top priority. Current planning, habitation, production, consumption patterns must be radically altered in safe, just, and supportive ways if possible. We all kind of know this. I'm saying something that I think is very obvious. This whole presentation is sadly obvious in a lot of ways, but we can also talk about that. And the most important thing is to just not make things, to not use things, to avoid a process in general, to avoid an enormous amount of energy, material, and also people wasting their time producing things they might not care about that much. And then finally, so-called green technologies are not a viable solution. They're a delay political and socio-ecological transformation. Again, as I said already 3 times in this presentation, solar panels, wind turbines, dams, micro hydro, these can all be used greatly and in responsible ways. But as they're being used, which is the majority, which is what I do in my work more than talking what I'm saying today, is they're not being used responsibly. They're being used to power infrastructures that are designed to fail, and they're designed to have to extract and to use more energy and materials and put people to works and qualities of life that they don't really want and that are not nice, when we can really do better and have more fun. And so in general, what I'm giving you right now is a general overview of this is the political ecology of the military and policing. And this is an area that needs greater development and I hopefully interest. And with this, I'm done. So thank you. Yes.
Xander, thank you so much for a really thought-provoking, eye-opening presentation. I'm sure that there are going to be a lot of questions in response. We're going to be taking questions from Zoom and from in the room. We'll take two at a time. And if you're in the room asking a question, please wait for Alinka to show up with this microphone. You need to put it pretty close to your mouth in order for people to hear. And please introduce yourself when you ask your question. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you for the talk. I thought that was very thought-provoking. And you mentioned something. Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Julie. I'm a student at UMass Boston in the School for the Environment. And you mentioned kind of towards the beginning of the talk that you were against nuclear because of a slew of problems. But I guess I just want to ask you, isn't it better for the nuclear waste to be contained underground in these really secure containers versus coal and natural gas and fossil fuels being put into the air that I breathe when I go outside? I don't know. I just am curious what what your opinion is about like nuclear. I just want to hear more, I guess.
Oh yeah, okay. No, no, we don't have to use the camera. I don't like being the guy back here who's like, oh, I'm behind here. Ugh. I was trying to like make it more human, but here we go.
Do you want to take a second question before, or do you want to go ahead and answer?
Really? After all of that, you got nothing. Thank you. Look at this. Look at these astute.
Hello, my name is Rebecca. I'm in the College of Engineering Physics. I am going to piggyback actually off her question. I'm wondering kind of what your thoughts are on uranium extraction and knowing that we can power large areas with nuclear power plants for centuries at a time. I'm just wondering if that is, in your opinion, more beneficial than what we're doing now, or if it's the exact same.
Sure. Wow, I feel like the nuclear lobby's like really doing it at this university. There's a lot of amazing resources. There's actually new books with Verso, Pluto, I think MIT Press about nuclear that I would highly recommend looking at. I can't remember the names of them, but they're kind of like nuclear. I think one of them is nuclear is not the solution. So for the first question, what makes you think that nuclear waste is actually stable underground and does not leak into waterways and soils?
Double sealed containers that have like a vacuum in between layers. And so it sounds, even if it's not perfect, so much better than just putting it into the air. I don't know. I didn't expect to get a question back.
Okay. Well, no, I mean, I like to, do you have something related to this? Okay. So there's a lot of things, and this is for both y'all. I highly recommend, and this is old. So I'm inclined, which I don't think is true. In fact, I've just read recently when I was trying to actually read up on some recent nuclear stuff that this is not true. But I want to believe that there's some new mining and healthier techniques, and there's more containment and yellow cake dust and things like this for the mining side of things. And I've been listening to people for a very, very long time. Actually, not that long. I'm not that old, but I've been listening to people for a long time talk about how they're going to like cut down 10,000 years of half-life to like 500 years and things like this. I've not seen any of this, have not heard about this in any real way being applied, but I'm inclined to believe that it is somewhere in some place. actually, you know what? I talked to someone who was working on this, but sometimes it's not financially viable to do this. And these things don't get off the ground. But I would highly recommend, besides I mentioned, there's 3 books, nuclear power is not the solution, things like this. But if you want to learn about the history of uranium development in this country and what it does and how it leaks on indigenous territories, I would highly recommend you to read Ward Churchill's The Radioactive Colonization of Native North America. And that was a really great, it's horrible. It's profoundly disgusting in terms of how nuclear power was developed. But again, this is an older time. The industry's probably cleaned itself up a bit. Probably not, but let's give it a benefit of the doubt here. But it talks about, I learned that the river I was living near had 900,000 tons of nuclear waste leaked into it from the Hanford uranium enrichment plant that was making nuclear weapons that got dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I'm pretty sure. You can check me on that. And I did not know that this was 6 times worse than Chernobyl in terms of the leakage. It still leaks down the Columbia River between Washington and Oregon. And there's so many sites like this. Go look at the US Superfund sites, look at these things. I'm shocked that 3 Mile Island is now, Bill Gates is trying to take that over for AI and things like this. So the problem of nuclear power, there are powerful lobbies and monies. There's a lot of things being sold into it. I want to believe that there's been huge advances in the industry. I can't say yes or no to that, so I want to leave that open. But I cannot stress the level of problems that have really bad stuff that's been created, and there's still big issues, and the amount of infrastructure and the mining of these things, and where's the mining being taken place? I know that there's a lot more spots in Africa, but I'm thinking French nuclear power plants right now. I can go on for these things, but I want to shift this to say I'm actually really worried about what has already been planned, the materials that are used, and the ways that we're living on suburban and urban layouts that are designed for automobility, that are completely dependent on cars. There's not a single thing that is actually really making these. There's a lot of social and political issues with how we're living, which have serious ecological repercussions, but also social and psychosocial implications for how we live. And sometimes I worry that pretend the plethora and multiple books debunking the nuclear lobby, pretend those aren't true. Even if we had those stories and it worked, I'm not sure we want to enable this lifestyle, not only for its ecological impacts, but also for its social and psychosocial impacts for how we relate and the possibilities that are being lost by succumbing to what we're used to. So I don't know, there's something, we can talk more. I talk too much. But please.
I think just for the Zoom audience, if you don't mind. Thanks so much.
I don't know if it's a question, maybe it'll form into a question, but so I grew up in Utah and then I moved here, and I've noticed a distinct difference in, like, interpersonally, I've noticed a distinct difference in people growing up in cities versus people growing up more around nature. And it's, I guess, there's no blame being put on the individual, but I guess people growing up in cities and around all this education and universities and opportunity to learn about this, I do notice like more apathy or a lack of interest or care versus family and friends growing up in like the West or Midwest who have a different relationship to earth and nature.
Microphone.
Yeah. Question, how could we encourage people who grow up in cities to have a better connection to nature? It's really broad, but
yeah,
you can kind of go anywhere with that.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, this presentation is trying to do that, in the sense of, I don't know about y'all, but I've had a hard time with police my whole life. And I don't come from a particularly bad neighborhood or anything like this. And it was still bad because I was an unsupervised skateboard youth. And so the police for a lot of people are an immediate issue and problem. And I'm telling you that you should care about the environment more if you want to stop the police. And obviously you have to do a little bit more work there if you want to be more precise and direct in terms of actually looking at what ecosystems are producing what metals and minerals that are then going to be produced to put into bombs or weapons or guns or whatever. But so my presentation is one way to say, hey, urban youth who don't know trees and waters and river that well, there's actually more reason to care about these things. And then if that can develop a connection there, then you can actually learn to feel the benefits of actually what living in around trees or being outside. And actually the more, I don't want to affirm these kind of social, but how being in the environment actually is profoundly beautiful and great. And you'll see your stress levels go down, and you might learn a lot of things about your body and the planet and the environment that you live in. But so that's one cheap answer related to my presentation. Okay. I was going to try to answer your other question.
No, that's awesome. I was thinking maybe more like mandatory field trips if you're in biology. That could be cool.
If there's not mandatory field trip, I mean, sometimes I think the lens of biology actually separates you more from nature because you're there. Again, we got to think of our feminist science. Really, please look into feminist critiques of science. They're really profoundly important. But sometimes if your whole idea is to go grab the earthworm, to cut it open and see its insides and control pieces of it, you don't actually get to see the beauty of the earthworm or the frog or whatever environment by seeing actually how it interacts and relates and how ecosystems work and can thrive and cooperate with each other, even though some get eaten sometimes and decompose. But there's there's a million things to do. But yes, I mean, there should be mandatory field trips in biology classes or all the time. In fact, maybe we should learn our local herbs and the plants and waters where we live instead of some horrible histories that never really happened that way.
Thank you.
Yeah. All the way in I saw your hand up there, all the way in the, actually,
I think before I head to the back, maybe I'll ask a couple of Zoom questions and then I'll head your way. We have a question from Callie Lambard from Westchester University, who's asking if there's any research into the atmospheric and climatic effects of munitions and bombs being exploded in war zones on a global scale to include weather changes.
I don't know of any, but I'm inclined to think that there are, and I don't know though. I think a quick Google search might be more effective than me in this moment, which I'm sad to say. But if it's not being done, this research that should be done, but then at the same time, we also know these things are already doing this, and this is not a good thing, and it shouldn't happen in the first place. And I'm not sure why. This gets into one of my biggest crises of my life. I spend my life, I could be swimming, I could be flying, I could be petting cats, I could be skateboarding. There's so many ways one can live and enjoy. But I'm here calculating things to prove to an audience like you or more official people that here are the specific numbers of how horrible something is, what we already knew was horrible. This is a waste of life, and it's usually powering some weird university bureaucracy. So in this case, while this would be an excellent research protocol, and I would encourage you to go there if you have that skill set and training, there's also this problem of we know this is already bad, so why not stop it from happening in the first place? But sorry, this wasn't towards you. Just so you know, my raised tone is my own existential crisis as being a researcher and how much years I've spent in front of a computer.
And a very valid one. I'll ask a second Zoom question and then head over to the other in-person questions. Stephanie Buchler is wondering, what would you add about the destruction that policing wreaks on infrastructure and then causes a need for new materials and energy needed for rebuilding that infrastructure if poorer communities are even able to adequately rebuild?
So you say police destroying infrastructure in the beginning?
Yes, I think it's about the cycle between police destroying infrastructure and then the need for more materials to rebuild that.
So yeah, with the destruction of infrastructure, we usually think of the military bombing milk factories, electrical grids. I mean, all the things the U.S. military right now has been doing in Iran. So the police, I think of more destroying social fabrics and also infiltrating social fabrics. There's obviously plenty of instances of police attacking certain businesses or people and roughing up some of these things. I mentioned them destroying a lot of protest infrastructure and wasting lots of water and generating a lot of unused plastic. I'm sorry, I was so thrown off by not understanding the first part, what the second part of the question is.
No, I think that was a good answer. I think the question is like that relates as well to like low-income communities being able to adequately rebuild, and I think it's getting at the cycles of.
Yeah, most certainly. The police, despite there's an argument for a lot of help and service that the police provide to the community, some of the best arguments against the police is actually the impact of being a police has on police officers. And you can look at domestic violence rates, you can look at suicide rates, and different things like that. And there's no doubt even if there's obviously exceptions and no shortage of good intentions within the police force, they have been designed to maintain class and racial hierarchies and to put people down. And even if there's been, and yeah, I mean, yeah. So again, there's any book on police history will tell you this.
Hi, I'm Jack. I was wondering about the cycle you described with extraction, production, and the security industry. Do you think it can or will be disrupted in a world in which we have like capitalism as the sort of prevailing like international system, and or in a world where we have borders or where punitive justice systems are common? What kind of shift do you see as having the potential to change this relationship that exists?
So, I mean, great question. I mean, I'm going to start backwards and go over. I think Trump, despite all of the horror and ridiculousness, and the US has no shortage of reasons why they should be embarrassed on the international stage. And there's obviously some of the most horrendous things about this country are just being reaffirmed. None of this is actually new. There's just been waves and flows of it, which we should remember. But I think we should really use Trump as an opportunity, because what I've been dealing with the last couple, I mean, an opportunity to say like, hey, this type of police violence is not okay. Like there's a lot of now opportunities to really intervene and to talk to people who might not have been ready to talk about and accept the history of the United States and what it's done and where it came from. There's obviously a lot of great things about the Constitution and our rights. There's a great idea behind the United States. However, it is built on a very brutal and genocidal and ecocidal foundation of clearing indigenous folk from this land, which needs to be reconciled and fixed and remedied. And there's not a single sign of that ever happening to this day. But that said, this is now an opportunity to actually reassess and really push for more of these systems. I don't think anything from above was ever going to fix these things. I obviously have policy briefs and analyses about a lot of the things that I've said. I don't hold my breath. If there's going to be any change, it's going to come from people doing it themselves and talking to their neighbors and making these things happen. And one of the things that I see beneficial about Trump, even though it's a stretch and I'm not sure beneficial is the right word, is that so right now he just paid $1 billion to actually have people to stop producing low carbon infrastructures, which this isn't necessarily a good thing. However, what I've witnessed, this political polarity between Democrat, Republican, hydrocarbon capital and so-called renewable capital has been a serious problem. And so there's been this blind acceptance of so-called green solutions that really aren't solutions in any way, whether it's reduced emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, international programs with forests, or different market-based conservation, or wind turbines, solar panels, carbon capture storage, which is hilarious, and you can thank Norway for that one, but the US has done well to jump on that. These have never been adequate solutions. And people see this across all social and political categories. And electric vehicles, this is insane if you look at the material processing and things like this. Despite the horrible circumstances this is going under, and I don't think there's ever going to be good circumstances, now is a time to actually push for real renewable energy, to actually have deeper conversations about these things. And I think it's important not to react to a far-right push that makes you cling to solutions that were never really solutions in the first place. But I would say that there's a general opportunity right now to actually to use the ridiculousness and more extreme versions of what's always existed to make those changes. But to go to the first part of your question, there's a lot of debates from people, there's a lot of debates from different communists or socialist modernists or eco-modernist leftists, whatever you want to call them, and they are convinced that they can do another mode of industrialization that will not reproduce the same harms and accumulation patterns. I've not read anything that convinces me of this, especially if you look at the histories of political control, and especially if you look at a lot of these regimes and what they did to dissidents, especially to different anarchists or anti-authoritarian Marxists within these own regimes that are by this government claimed as Marxist or socialist, which I reject because a lot of them violated and turned from these principles. But I'm not so hopeful about these other regimes of socialist accumulation that I hear about. but I do believe that there's no shortage of possibilities. I mean, even the things I'm criticizing right now, sure, theoretically it's possible, but I'm more concerned in seeing what people can actually make and move on, either as individuals, as groups, or as entire neighborhoods, or even as entire municipalities or bioregions in terms of what this can be done. But that's a bit long-winded.
Hi, my name is Jameson Huerta. I'm a student at UMass Boston. I spent a little over a decade doing targeting for the Army for a lot of the munitions that you mentioned are so wasteful. And I find myself now, as I transition out of that field and into this, at kind of a crossroads, and like a crisis, kind of like you're mentioning you are in yourself, where I agree with all of this and how wasteful war is, but I also find it very scary that we've spent the last 100 years plus maybe like showing the world how dominant we are as a military power. And I don't I don't know where we find the balancing act to cut down on all of the waste and still maintain a level of strength that doesn't put us at risk going from, big superpower down to I guess if we downscale to a normal sized military. I find that scary after painting such a large target on our back. So I wanted to see your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, an excellent question. I mean, it's a hard one, but let's talk modern military strategy for a moment. Not sure how well the U.S. has been doing, or sorry, U.S. proxies and the U.S. have been doing against modern warfare, specifically with drones, specifically with different types of missiles and things like this. I mean, it's a very valid concern. There's a lot of, it's really shameful for a lot of different reasons. And I say shameful, but so many people have been starved, killed, and died because of the hubris, because of the ignorance, because of the insecurity of the United States government. And it's put all of us in a severely unsafe situation, especially when we're traveling, but always. And I think that there needs to be immediate reconciliation and diplomatic loss of face to actually maybe be a bit more human instead of more robotic, masculine, military, aggressive for the reasons, for the targets painted on our back. But so besides serious diplomatic reconciliation and maybe actually instead of trying to strong arm and extract everyone's resources so we can continue this trajectory of our really cool cell phones and cars that make us so happy, and malls and things that don't make everyone want to drink a lot and do a lot of drugs. And I mean, there's also other things this leads to. You can look at the statistics that are not so good. There's serious room for change diplomatically, internally, for how we think about ourselves, how we live, and how we do things. But on a more practical level, which is the more uncomfortable and difficult conversation, is there's been signs for a very long time that walking around with heavy infrastructure, aircraft carriers, certain planes like this might not be the best way to actually fight. And I would advocate, I mean, I think there's a bigger problem, is that this country is really, there's a serious class, non-gendered, gendered, racial hierarchy designed to actually turn us into, to ultimately be exploited by people higher up on the ladder than us. And that includes destroying the environments we live in, creating extremely uncomfortable circumstances where we're constantly stepping on each other to exist in this hierarchy. And so there becomes an internal problem to even talk about any type of unity when in the same way we might speculate that the Trump administration tried to take advantage of the internal disturbance within Iran, because obviously there's a lot of bad stuff going on internally there. That regime is doing a lot of bad things. But so is this one. And so it's doing a lot of bad things internally in a serious way. So I'm not even sure how to even discuss defending what's going on here because of the conditions that have been created. But there's no shortage of ideas of popular ecological warfare and decentralized strategies and a redirecting of things to adjust, to demilitarize, to save money, and to actually become more lethal, mobile, and flexible in certain ways, which I wouldn't want to advocate, because I'm not happy with. We can get behind the American Constitution, but it never included everyone when it should have, and it certainly didn't include the environment that it's just been exploiting and destroying. So I have a hard time even advocating that, given what there has to be big changes, but there are ways to demilitarize. There are ways to actually use resources more efficiently, respectfully, and actually create more security, even on a geopolitical level. And there's another thing there that probably the most important part that I was saving, I just lost, but there's ways to engage in different strategies. Oh yeah, the biggest obstruction to this right now are path dependencies with weapon contractors in these companies, and specifically the people invested in these high technology missiles and how they're produced and how they're mined in these. And who knows the supply chain for a cruise missile or an MK-84 bomb. So, how much, so the big criticism, as you all know right now, is that there's a 20K drone taking out a 4 million plane, or X amount of 1,000 missile taking out a plane, a drone taking out these different infrastructures. It's built to lose in every way, shape, or form, not only militarily for what your question is talking about, but really in terms of how things are organized socially. I mean, we can even pick on this university, but I'm very happy to be here, and I appreciate the people who brought me, so I'm not going to go there. But hopefully this is a stimulating question that I don't think is actually discussed enough, especially from social movements who need to learn to defend themselves.
I think I'll just jump in with 2 rapid fire questions from our Zoom audience, kind of picking up on that last point about the university. We have a comment from an associate professor of political science, Andres Henao Castro, who says, "Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I wanted to ask about the role of universities in all of this, as they support military research, have police departments, invest money in funds that include weapons manufacturers, and so on." And I think a second question that maybe relates to it is from Gabriela Alonso Yanez, who says, "I appreciate that your framing suggests that meaningful socio-ecological transformation involves political struggle. Could you elaborate on how you approach political positionality as an academic?"
Okay, this is fine. Let me do political positionality. There's a lot of cleaning house. I mean, so right now the Trump administration is encouraging to clean house, to get rid of honest conversations about how to create real sustainability, renewability, and pretty much everything I'm talking about. There's an attempt to clean house and to structurally make this a problem. I would say it's the other way. Universities are they're in giant real estate corporations that have their hands in biotech, nanotech, and a lot of really frightening and terrifying technologies, and this kind of will to power, and whoever can have the craziest technologies or AI to do these things is a very serious concern. I think everyone should become a lot more active in looking at what's going on, not only in the university, but even in their own departments, but especially the engineering and robotics departments and AI and things like this. My political positionality is, I don't believe in scholar activism. That's not true. That's not what I'm doing here. Obviously, you can see my concerns and my kind of subjectivities, but they're coming from very kind of serious and real places that need to be acknowledged. And by not acknowledging these things are a disservice. I think that one should be as rigorous in their methodology as they can be to produce the most accurate information they can. I think that everyone should abandon calling themselves scholar activists and actually focus on being the most precise and the best they can in this. Just because I don't cling to the liberal myths of society, because I don't cling to the myths of the police or of prisons or things like this, does not mean that this is not inaccurate, because it's actually more accurate. To be critical and to be concerned about these things and to recognize the statistics and look at these problems is serious. And as I said, I'm concerned about police, prisons, war, and military, but there are very serious and productive conversations like the one we just had about actually how do we deal with self-defense as a nation without, what are ways to actually engage in self-defense that aren't ecologically damaging, require a lot of energy and material. This is an important question. Same goes with the police. How do we actually have a system that can actually promote security and to support people and do these things? Very serious question. My tone or how I'm speaking is indicating that I am not convinced by these things, and there's no shortage of academic evidence to say that I'm right in my concerns and in my own personal frustration in doing this. So I would say, while I might have my own beliefs, and I'm happy to talk about those, I'll write them into my positionality section and to have the most refined methodology I can. So when you read the study, you know it's there. So My hope is that we can actually address these large social and ecological issues, even also epistemological and ontological even, but how we can address these issues the best we can. And by having a clear methodology to show where we're coming from, we can hopefully get somewhere and pushing on these things. But right now we have academies that are extremely ideological, pretending like they're not, but are based in really toxic and ill-fated ideologies and epistemologies that need to be critically assessed if there's any semblance of academic freedom and also rigor and honesty. So with that, I'll end.
Well, that feels like a mic drop moment if ever there was one. Just before our final thank you, I want to say that if you'd like to hear this talk again, see those slides or tell your friends about it, it will soon be on the consortium's website and YouTube channel. Also, we have one more talk in this series related to the things that Xander was saying at the end. It's Janine Yazzie coming to talk about authoritarianism, indigenous resistance, and the rise of AI. Again, I want to thank you all for being here and tell you that if you can leave us any feedback, we would really appreciate it. And finally, I want to again thank Xander for this really amazing, fascinating, thought-provoking talk. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Carol. Appreciate everyone. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it.